Hello and welcome to the latest edition of East Ethnia. I would like to be talking to you under happier circumstances, but I think after the elections that took place yesterday in the United States, um, we only have to recognize that the thing that we most hoped could be avoided, the thing that we most feared, has happened. This is something that I am not ashamed to say that I was surprised by it. I was, of course, aware that the result that came was theoretically possible, but believed, as people tend to believe, in the good qualities of my fellow human beings, and this is something that we do in order to survive um, regardless of whether we're confronted with evidence to the contrary in our actual interactions. As Emil Durkheim says, when you invite people to your home, you do it assuming that they're not going to steal all of your spoons, even though you don't have any evidence that they won't. Because if you didn't, you would not be able to see people at all. Um, so what can we expect and what can we do in the time that comes? I want to talk about that, and I want to focus a little bit on what it means for Southeast Europe. First of all, many years of doing research on politics and political culture in the region has given me some insight into what happens when the worst people come into power. And I'll tell you something about when the worst people come into power, and that is that when they come, they want to stay. And they tend to expand. They expand control over state institutions in order to be able to stay, and they expand that control into private institutions, so that now you have the kind of party control exercised by, in large measure, people who are either directly involved or complicit with large scale crimes that is larger and more intensive than anything that was exercised by the Communist Party in the days when they were in power. We can no longer really talk about tradition. What we're seeing is the entrenchment of a system of private interest that's been built up over the last 30 years. So once they are in, there was a chance to get rid of them, but that chance was missed. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of them. A second thing that I think I might be able to offer some insight to is hate campaigns. And I think that there is no denying that what we've seen in the United States yesterday is the election of a movement that was founded around a campaign of hatred. I mean, anybody who goes into the campaign with the slogan "mass deportations now" is pretty much acknowledging what they're doing. But a couple of things about hate campaigns. First of all, hate campaigns never recognize their own status as hate campaigns. They present themselves as campaigns of self-defense. Self-defense against a threat, and the threat usually is conceived as being presented by a group that is defenseless, or at the very least, much weaker. Whether we're talking about minority ethnic or national groups, whether we're talking about groups like trans people, who are very frequently the objects of violence and discrimination, and in almost no instances a threat to anybody. Or whether we're talking about immigrants who live their lives under constant fear of legal threat and work the jobs that are least well rewarded and most difficult in the society. So you might think that when these campaigns experience their claims being shown to be false, or the horrifying results of their activity, that public opinion turns. But this is more the exception than the rule. And if you look at what's happened with some hate campaigns that we see in the recent past, they tend to turn themselves into ideology. They tend to turn themselves into mythology. They tend to ingrain themselves in networks of culture and education, so that the wrong that they do appears to be right. That's what we can expect here. And what can we expect from the United States on the level of international policy? Well, first of all, in terms of protections of civilians and international human rights, I think we already know what will happen with Ukraine, because Trump has said so. He will withdraw aid from Ukraine and pressure Ukraine to accept a settlement that cedes to Russia a large quantity of the territory that is claimed. So if Ukraine is going to be defended against invasion, that will have to be done by Europe without support from the United States. A similar thing for Gaza. even if you do not believe that that the violence in Gaza amounts to genocide, it's going to become genocide now. Because again, Trump has said as much. He said that he is going to give the Israelis a blank check. And this is the appeal, I think, of Trump to authoritarian leaders pretty much everywhere in the world, is that he will have a lack of interest in the things that they do to civilians and to defenseless people. That is the appeal. Now, in terms of the Balkans specifically, there are a few things that we can expect. One is, I think, a continuation of the disinterest that we saw under the first Trump administration, and unfortunately also during the Biden administration. Second, if you look at the approach that Trump has taken to the Balkans while out of power, he's intending to use it as a base for money laundering, principally of money from the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf states, through vehicles such as his former ambassador to Germany and his son-in-law. So we're going to see a continuation of disinterest. We're going to see a continuation of money laundering. Even though it's been very weak, I would expect to see a more or less complete stop to campaigns for promotion of democracy, equality, and so on. Now, in terms of this, I think that the period before us is going to be a dangerous one, and it's likely to be a violent one. And we can blame the people who are coming into power for that, but we also have to blame a bit the group that is leaving power, because Biden, during the time that he was president, I think lost a lot of opportunities. He began in his first year in office saying that a priority of his foreign policy would be to promote democracy. Um, and this was largely abandoned. You can say that it was abandoned because other questions in the world became more important, but it's something that was felt in the region. Authoritarian states and structures were solidified. What we could also see is that one of the hopes of the Democratic Party, like of the Labour Party in the UK, and of other parties and what we might conditionally call the center left, is that they generally promise and then fail to promote equality. And this leads to the type of dissatisfaction that is displayed in the election results, like the one that we have just seen. You could probably do a broad sociological analysis of pretty much all instances of large-scale violence in the world and say that the root cause of every instance of large-scale violence is inequality. The violence either comes through desperate efforts of groups of people to overcome it, or equally desperate efforts of groups of people to maintain it. So this means that a fairly pessimistic future is ahead of us. What are we going to be able to do in this near future that is coming? And I'm sorry to say that institutionally, we are probably going to be able to do very little. We're going to see a consolidation of power over institutions that could potentially stop some of the worst consequences of what is coming. So there is not a lot to hope for from institutions, unfortunately. But the other question is, what can we expect of ourselves? Because regardless of who is holding political power and what their motivations are and what their beliefs are, we are nonetheless going to continue living our lives. And probably the best thing that we can do is attempt, as far as we are able, to live or to continue our lives according to our values. The primary of those values being to give support to people in a more vulnerable position than you are. So we will need to do that, and it's going to be frustrating, and it's going to be exhausting, and we're going to be faced with disappointment. But we've been here before, and we're able to learn, I think, from the experience of people in other countries. This is a place where research, knowledge, understanding, they are always valuable. They're going to be more valuable than they have ever been. So above all, we need to keep doing our work. Thanks for listening, and sorry the message could not be happier.